You're taking the family, the adoptive family, the adoptee, as well as the birth family's feelings, and trying to bring them all together in the book as well. I mean, I think the hiddenness of the birth mother and birth father, birth families, and the perspective has been missing also. And so, that's one of the things I really appreciate.
Right, you don't hear too much about the birth father in these discussions. It's really interesting.
But Mary?
Katie, I was so moved by what you were saying about there's so much focus on the adoptee all the time, and the moment or the period in which you realize, oh, my father has a story in this. I'm a character in his life. And Steve, I wonder for you what it was like to have Katie see what your story was as a father vis-a-vis adoption.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we haven't really talked about that much, but I think I created my own difficulty around that because Pep, who is this, sort of non-Jewish certainly, which non-Buddhist, is sort of a guy running a small town insurance agency, as that character, and so the ways I used him to be, I used some of my experience in China, but he's quite a different guy, so that I felt really, knowing Katie for quite a while, I felt really terrific writing this and then having her read it. I feel like, well, I hope this isn't too egocentric, but I felt like it was a gift to the three of us. It wasn't just, this is different. The House of God may have been a gift to doctors, but they're a little further off. This was a gift to the three of us. And so I think everything you've said about it, whenever we talked about it, has been just total pleasure for me, and actually it's very interesting for me, for Janet and Katie to share this curse of being, in a family with a writer. That wasn't me, but that was me, how do you get inside of my head,
I actually felt the stories of the animals and the moments that you recorded was like a beautiful recording of beautiful memory, like a quilt or a fabric of life that has been woven now out of that really is very moving.
Did you have any realizations, or as a writer, you sometimes know what's coming next, and sometimes you don't. Were there learning moments for you in writing about adoption in particular? But you can go out from there. Learning moments in the writing where it took you somewhere where you hadn't quite realized that you knew that or you thought that? Yeah.
One of them was what I read, that was really working out something. But another one, I just referred to it, it's really rather comical. It's a tortuous trail about how they finally get together with this one. It's not a straight shot by any means. A lot of different stuff goes wrong, and everybody has to play their part. But they do meet, as an intermediary, the older sister of Zhao Lu. And so they finally, for the first time in this book, are learning something, that she's still alive and where she might be and stuff like that. And then the birth father is mentioned, whose name is, I forget what it actually is. It's William. Oh yes, William's the birth father, the Chinese sister says. And all of a sudden, Pep says, "What? The birth father? What? Wait a second. I didn't realize there was a birth father." Because, and that was a real, because I never really thought of that. But you have to understand, as you heard, Janet is very good with communities and connections. And so I found myself, soon after we brought Katie home, at the Episcopal Divinity School at Harvard, in the largest comfortable room they had with 100 women and me, a woman's gathering to welcome Katie home, and there's a lot of talk about the birth mother and the birth mother this and the birth mother that. And so I didn't really think so much about it. I never really thought about the birth father very much, because we light a candle to the birth mother. We don't light a candle to the birth father, So in the book we have him say, "Oh my God, a birth father." And then he starts thinking, well, he calls himself William, not Bill, you know. And of course, then there's this little rivalry that goes on, you know. Well, he could create a baby where I had to adopt a baby, you know. And it's like that was kind of a moment, yeah. And the birth father doesn't get much discussion here, but for very obvious reasons, you know. What are the obvious reasons? Or are you just wondering about that?
Doesn't get a lot of discussion.
Yeah, in this whole,
I
in
didn't
our whole
look at
journey.
that.
Who's ever meant to, whoever hears about the
That's not
birthday?
true. I don't think that's true.
Well, no, I mean, in our Chinese community, I have never heard
That's not
a
true.
father talk about birth dad. And there's a lot,
Birth families, I haven't heard birth fathers really, like, male to male thing.
come on,
But I
help me.
think
Some of
birth
you
families-
guys may have some data on this. Help me.
I have data on this. I mean, it's the men are smaller players. It's true that in domestic adoptions as well as international, the men
Yeah,
are,
well-
I mean, not as thought of, not as searched for. It's changing a bit. It is, but it's certainly true.
Let's see if people have any questions. Yeah, Ruth.
I have a related question. I know that, well, I've read the book, so I know that when the father's character, really struggles with trying to understand what the mother's experience is in the process, it seems like there's a lot of turmoil there, and I wonder if you feel that's, I don't really know what my question is, but do you think that it's common that it's a really different experience for the mother to adopt than it is for the father to adopt? And how so? Because the mother in the story is just, the intensity of her feelings are a little overwhelming for the father in a way. And I just wonder if you could address that.
The adoptive family?
The adoptive family.
Yeah.
Is the mother's experience very different from
Yeah.
the father's experience in the adopted family?
Well, I think, oh my God, what a question. I mean, because it touches, I'm not sure adoption is the issue as much as the difference of experience of parenting of fathers and mothers. And they're probably different, but just as intense and just, I think, more emotional intensity expressed. And I mean, I think the sort of depth and sustained and importance and centrality and profound meanings. I just think generally men are not likely to talk about it as much in a routine way and work on it day to day, but yet would produce a beautiful book about it.
I mean, Janet started the adoption group for girls. So how old were they when you started this group? They're all girls.
10,
From 10 to what?
13.
Yeah, you know. I mean,
Tell
so
us
you,
about the group. That was really important experience, wasn't it? You surprised me when you said that last May.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, that, that's a very, I think, formative age for all girls going through, just everything else that's going on in life as is. So it was very nice to have that,
Pre-adolescent.
outlet for they were girls that I knew through different parts of my life, but never had been at school with. So we all came from very different backgrounds and had been brought up very differently. But, we all shared that common theme of, having been adopted, being raised by, luckily very, progressive,
you were all Chinese adopted.
Yeah. Very progressive households who had, we've been very similar in the sense, they hadn't tried to hide adoption. We've been very open about exploring Chinese culture together and things like that. So we had a lot of common ground to talk about. But we also had some very different things. So, it was a chance for us to kind of bring up things like, oh, this weird thing happened at school today that, slightly touched a little bit on race and made me think about, my identity as a Chinese adoptee. But then we also did talk about other things that 10 to 13-year-old girls talk about and having trouble with at school. So it was a very nice outlet to have. But in that sense, I think it just kind of reinforced that whole idea that we were talking about where we don't hide this part of our identity. We don't kind of just push it off to the side and say no, we're totally normal, or, don't worry about it. This isn't important, don't think about it. It was very openly embraced and accepted. And I think it was very encouraging for me to have that and share that with other people and make lasting connections with these people that, you know, I continue to see and I continue to connect with as I grow older. So
There was something that you said too, that when you moved out of the house and now you're living in an apartment by yourself, it's a whole different story, isn't it?
Well, just like as we've gotten older, you know, when I was a young kid, I think this is what you're talking about, when I was in elementary school and, you know, middle school, and, you know, your parents are picking you up from school every day, they're meeting your friends when they come over to the house and stuff like that. It's kind of out in the open, like, oh, Katie's parents don't look like her, she's adopted. It's self-explanatory. And now that I'm on my own, I'm an independent person, like, it's some things it's a shock to me to have to remember, like, oh yeah, the people I'm talking to, when I talk about my parents, what they're picturing is probably not what I'm thinking in my head. And so sometimes, like, I'll say something about something you guys said or we did or a tradition or something, and I kind of can tell people have like a weird look because they're expecting, like, I don't know, something really traditionally Chinese or something for us to do instead of, like, I don't know, do something else. And I'll realize, like, oh, it's because they think that I have Chinese parents. I come from a Chinese household, you know, whether it's traditional Chinese or, you know, American Chinese, whatever. So I have found that I kind of, as I'm forging my own identity going forward as an adult, I kind of need to find ways to kind of weave it into the conversation. Like, oh, by the way, I'm adopted. You know, I'm obviously not trying to be that obtuse about it, but, like, make it clear to people, you know, who I am, where I come from, so that, you know, because there's not a lot of opportunities for a lot of my, like, my coworkers, you know, people I've interacted with in my professional life to see my parents and meet my parents. So sometimes it doesn't come up. So it's just something that I've found that I need to kind of sometimes hit on once in a
You
while.
also mentioned that sometimes you get the projections of other people, their ideas about adoption, so that you wind up being an kind of having to educate people.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, once, you know, especially college, I guess, was like the first time when I really had to do that, because, you know, when your parents in college don't really have much of an impact on your life there. It's the first time you're really on your own, you're making your own connections with people, you're making friends, and yeah, like we talk about, you know, our parents and our families back home, and when I would bring it up, you know, definitely many people had questions for me. You know, I might have been the first person I ever met that was, you know, internationally adopted, or that, you know, had that experience. So definitely I had a lot of people coming up and asking me questions, and it was nice to definitely never have felt like that was something I needed to hide and never needed to conceal details of. Because I mean, like I said, because of up until that point, it had always been so open that I never really had to explain it. It was a challenge for me too, to kind of be like, oh, now I have this opportunity to talk about this. What do I want to talk about? Because these people are open and they're asking me questions and they want to know genuinely my experience. So it was kind of refreshing, and it was new and different for me to be able to tell my story and, you know, be like, yeah, like, ask me what you want. You know, I want to chat and I want to hear your opinions about it. It was kind of different to be faced with people that this was brand new to them. They'd never seen it before, so.
You know, I'm thinking about one of the things we used to talk about. How does it feel to be Chinese and Asian in a group of, in school when there were very few in your class, and we would talk about it. And you used to say, I can't decide if I rather have more people like me or if I'm really special because I'm the only one. You thought about that for a lot of years, which was, you know, I think you couldn't figure out. In one way it felt bad to you, in another way you felt special. And
I think, maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but I think the first real trip when you were of age to understand some of this stuff, to Chinatown. And I think you didn't quite like it so much that
there were people who looked like
that everybody seemed to look like you. You know, you sort of lost your special looks in that, and it was surprising to us.
let's let other people.
Yeah.
I have a question about
Darren.
the novel itself, or the structure. It was interesting what you said about asking Katie about using her name. I have a separate question for Katie about being inside your head. How freaky, by the way. And I want to know what he got most wrong.
We got another hour.
It's interesting, the structure of it. Like, you asked Katie to use her own name, and it's obviously coming from you, autobiographical on so many levels. Why didn't you use your name or Janet's name? And is the novel autobiographical as a platform for a bigger idea or story? or that was interesting to me that you went to Katie, but you didn't go to Janet or yourself.
Well, I think I made a choice that I didn't, for some reason, it wasn't, I didn't want to put Janet or me too much in the novel as we are, because the two people in the novel, you can tell from their names, Cleo and Pep, right? They're both, quote, wasps. They're both kind of stiff people. They don't really know much about what they're doing in a way. They're not as out there. I mean, we were really very educated in I think in doing this process. We had anyway. So to make the book work, I couldn't write about Janet and me. I had to write about people for whom, they're moving from this little provincial town that they're in Hudson, New York, moving into the wilds of China. That's interesting. That's dramatic.
Of the 8 families you went with, how many was that the case for?
What, the people were a different.
The people were like these wasps.
Yeah.
I don't think I should comment on that.
Were there
very
any?
different socioeconomic,
Yeah.
religious backgrounds, very, very different
So
stories,
was it important
each
to
of
you
us.
to open it up so that more families could access the story, more to make it a little less myopically
No, it wasn't.
autobiographical?
No, I didn't even think about it. Those thoughts don't come to me, put it that way. No, I just realized I love the people that this might be based on. And, the characters in the novel, they are just full people that I really wanted to write about. They demanded to be written about, even though they weren't me and Janet. A lot of me and a lot of Janet is there, especially in the early, descriptions early in the book of the first years of Katie's life, a lot of the incidents. But the way they react to them is much, much more fascinating to me than the way Janet and I would react. Partly because they're maybe more freedom too. This was not a book. The House of God, is straight autobiography, really. All that horrible stuff. But this, I didn't want to do that here, Darren. And you wanted to ask Katie if I got anything really wrong?
What did you get most wrong in your head?
There were a couple times, I think I talked to you about this, Dad. You asked me what were my thoughts on the book, and I think one of the first things I said was sometimes the way he wrote it about Katie's thinking, that was like, I think that's a little too sophisticated for a 10-year-old at that age. Granted, she's dealing with a lot of stuff that I think a lot of 10-year-olds don't get to deal with and don't have that chance to, so I don't know what a 10-year-old in her shoes might think, but thinking about what I was like at 10, I don't think my thoughts went quite that far.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
like you were a sage.
Yeah, you definitely could tell, you had the wisdom of an older person writing a 10-year-old, so.
But you had a lot of wisdom. You did.
Yeah.
Well, I have
And you
one
do.
little thing that I don't know if you thought it or not, but this was based on something, and it's one of my favorite little lines in the book. Katie has just talked about her birth mother going to visit her in China, and she gets out of the car to go work out at a farm with horses, and this wonderful woman who runs the farm. And she's sad when she leaves the car to go into this barn, and it's autumn, and there's a gust of breeze that makes the colored leaves whirl up. You've seen that. It's just this whirlwind, and I'm in her head, and I'm sure you didn't think that. I watched you walk away, and the thought is like a bunch of little sads. Like a bunch of little sads, the leaves. And that wasn't what you thought, but that was writer's triumph.
Yeah. I just want
Right, John?
I just want to say, because Hannah Porter's here, and she grew up with Katie and was on that farm with Katie. And just very touching, as you were on that trip to China. And how was it to hear for you?
How was it
To hear. Is there anything you want to share?
Sure. It's very interesting because Katie and I were friends up until high school, we kind of drifted, moved away from each other. We don't think we really discussed adoption very much, from what I remember. So hearing your thoughts now are very interesting and touching, because there are a lot of experiences that I had with myself. And so like a memory that you have growing up, it's interesting that every adopted person hears about the time that they were adopted from their parents, and it's very touching.
I want to say for the record that your parents are not the parents in this book. But
There are some lines.
Hannah's father, who was a dear friend, and mother was a dear friend, her father was on this this tour with us through China, but before we got to the orphanage. So we were with China, we were with Hannah and Bruce, and so some of the stuff that Bruce got into, I put into the book, like his awful way of getting rid of beggars, right? Where when they accosted him, because they were quite assaultive sometimes, and I saw him do it once. We're walking down the street, and the guys are calling him, and he goes, "Look," and the beggar goes like that, and he rubs him in the face. I actually gave him the book when I saw this, and he said, "Did you put in that thing about me and the beggars?" Her father is a wonderful writer, wonderful storyteller. So, and also the other thing is both he and I are very tall, and we were constantly, there's a line about bashing your heads on the filthiest pit toilet in all of China, and he was always bleeding.
Any other?
Yeah, John. John is a dear friend from medical school after all these years.
John, I know you've addressed all sorts of different pieces of this, but Janice, what would you say was your major growth from having adopted Katie that you didn't expect? And then what was the growth that in addition happened from writing the book?
Well, that's a good question, John. I think for me, as Janet hinted, I can go a lot further when I'm in that, whatever you want to call it, focus or trance or in touch with the muse, while Shakespeare's on the shelf, which is hard to do. In a book, I can really, really get to some place, like the House of God. John knows he's a doctor, I mean, that experience was incredible, remarkable, awful, vicious. But I could only, and the reason that I wrote it is I said, somebody has to write about this. And so then I could move further into what should have happened. Chekhov has a wonderful line. You wouldn't think it of him, but he says, I have it over my desk, something like the greatest of writers not only capture reality as it is, but as it should be. You take it. I believe in writing. I believe that writing has a purpose, which is not all that true, I think, in some novels now. I think that novels and fiction has a purpose, and the purpose is to deal with injustice in the world. Partly that's the one family. And also the second thing is the danger of isolation and the healing power of good connection. And that's what all I do, that's what the House of God turned out to be, and that's what this turned out to be. It's about the healing power of good connection, which is mutual connection, which I learned from Janet.
Yeah, I would say, when you ask that I've been thinking about this recently, that I actually felt that my own racial identity changed as a mother. That I had this secret other racial identity as Asian, which I didn't look. But when you are that close and connected to a child, steering for her in the world, looking at her face all the time, I really did feel that my own racial identity expanded in a way that's way beyond just who you are, but also who you love is so much part of your identity that it changes my view of identity. So I actually feel like that was one of the, aside from just being a mother and a parent that everyone knows, having that cross race, cross country, very profound. And I remember being in airports, and I'd see an Asian family, and I'd sort of look at them like, we're kin, and then they would look at me like, what is this person?
Crazy.
So, but for a long time, and it was really interesting because I was at a workshop recently, and we were talking about race, and I actually had the feeling that since Katie has been living away and not as close in, that my own racial identity has changed again. It's it was just very interesting. So that's one of the biggest things I would say.
Yeah, something I was just thinking, like,
Yeah.
I've said it once before you, but I wonder if also part of it is, as a mother, you also feel a lot of your kid's identity as your own too,
Yeah.
and I think you start to see how the world looks at me differently, and you kind of take that on as your own too, as you said.
Well,
you start feeling
seeing
kind
through
of-
your eyes, I
Yeah.
would go look at a classroom, and all of a sudden I'd see race in a whole different way. That just makes me. I think you said something that has always stayed with me. After that trip with China, we got home to Logan Airport in the airplane, and Katie said, "Oh, I'm so happy to be home with people that look like us." And I'm like, "Oh my God, we just spent a month in China. We really did something wrong." But I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Like here in China, people all look alike, but here there's diversity. People look different, and that's so that your identity as a family was diversity. It wasn't white and Asian. It was like for you, it was like I'm at home in diversity. It's not exactly about racial identity." So that was really very opening for me, because I feel like that's kind of what expanded for me.
I think there's some of this in the book actually with, just one little tidbit that, after about the first couple of months with Katie, looking at her face, when we went outside, Caucasian eyes look different. They look strange. There's a real racial, cultural and gender difference that I have had to, yes, you had a question.
Oh, I'm curious if you grew up with any, obviously because you grew up around Boston, Chinese kids with Chinese parents that immigrated, and if you sought out a relationship with families like that, or if you had any.
I mean, to be honest, it was always kind of unfortunate that most of the schooling and places I went to, I was one of very few Asian kids, whether we were, born to, American-born Chinese or traditional Chinese, who parents were immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple, I think, kids in my middle school class growing up. One of them I know, her mom was white American, and her dad was Chinese and had come over from China, and he'd actually brought his parents over from China, and they were very did not speak any English, were very kept very traditional Chinese traditions and culture and stuff, and their whole family really embraced both of those worlds. And the mom actually took Chinese, learned Chinese so she could communicate with her in-laws and also raise her children. She had 3 daughters, raised them in a very bilingual, bicultural household, which I thought was awesome. And I remember going over to their house, and I don't think I necessarily sought this girl out, but we did obviously connect, and I became good friends with her. But I remember I went going over to her house several times, and I would come over, and her grandparents would see me and just immediately come over and start talking to me in Chinese and really fast Mandarin, and I would just sit there being like, I don't know what to do. And my friend would have to come save me. And I felt really bad because I knew they just wanted to connect with me, because I don't know how many other Asian friends this girl had. So they were her grandparents were seizing on this opportunity, like, oh my God, it's another Chinese girl. And but I always kind of felt a little envious of that, actually, to be honest, going over to that household and being like, obviously my parents were really great in integrating Chinese culture and teaching me about the history and all that. But I always felt like there was a little bit missing. Like I kind of wish that I had that little extra bit that I was able to say very firmly, this is also, I really understand this part of my identity really well, and had that extra, whether it's family or whether it's just the language, being able to incorporate that as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it's really interesting because my parents are immigrants, and I feel like if I had been adopted, it's kind of a shortcut into the society we're trying to assimilate to or not. So it's it's really interesting to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I feel like kind of it's one of those like grass is greener thing. Like
Yeah,
when you're a
yeah,
kid,
yeah.
you know, you kind of want what the other person has,
Right.
kind of thing. But it's definitely, it was interesting, I think, and yeah, no, I can see that where you're kind of coming from there.
Thanks for sharing.
I was just wondering, Jenna, towards the novel, what sort of research, if any, you did or groundwork you did aside from your own personal story you did to write this novel?
Well, a lot, an awful lot. I mean, this took a long time. I read everything. I was pleased to learn during the process of this that the only Chinese Nobel Prize winner, I don't remember his name even, who wrote Soul Mountain, won a prize about 5 or 6 years ago. It's the same mountain that this book is on. So I read that, and I got some hints about the flora and fauna. You know, I mean, I read everything, and the book hinges in some places around the evolution of Chinese characters, from the very primitive ones that are on tortoise shells that they find, you know, or bone, and how that evolved to others, and how they were very similar to animals and stuff in the earliest things, and then they get to be very schematic in the modern characters, you know. So I read, and the other big thing was we took in, as soon as Katie really came back, we took in Chinese graduate students in our house. You know, we had a little apartment in the house. So we had years and years and years of really close contact with them, and the book is partly dedicated to one of them who really has become a terrific friend, and yeah. So I really, I don't know, I just spent an awful lot of incredibly fun time, because I was stretching my mind, and it has to do with her, of course, time, and really learning about this. And for a writer, you don't need too much in some ways. I remember when we were on that trip, we took a special trip out into the countryside and spent just an afternoon and seeing a farm, and it just, that's the place that I used, and then going up on the mountain. So I read everything I could that was pertinent. Yeah.
Can I suggest we're moving toward 9 o'clock?
Yeah, we
and
should.
we'd like to, I'd love for Shem to sign some books.
Well, sell them first and then some.
Yeah, well, I'm being presumptuous that people won't steal them.
Yeah.
But, so maybe one more question if someone has it, otherwise.
Paula.
Yeah, ever since the first thing you said tonight, Jan, I've been trying to think how to articulate this. And when you all were talking about the story of getting the card for the friends and then finding out that this child was named Chun, and I was thinking about how that sort of story sounds like there was a fated connection, you know, a predestined connection, but then how so much else that you've been talking about has to do with finding ways that you were connected, that didn't have anything to do with predestination, you know, or fate or anything like that. And so I think that's so resonant for me of what diversity is really about, is reaching past superficial differences or important differences, but to find what's similar or where you can connect, which is what a lot of your story is about, and how it changed each of you.
I think, Paul, there are experiences around birth that have that kind of sense of spiritual. It's not like fate, but it's something of a profound sense of auspiciousness, or something more than we know. Not that fate or anything, but the spiritual charge of, I think people feel at birth and death often. And I think what I was saying is, I think around the adoption stories, there are also some of that same feeling, and that naming thing touched into that for me. That's all I meant by that.
Okay, books are for sale up here, and I'll be glad to sell them. Thank you.